Good afternoon, my little shits. How we doing? By the way, I am a little sick at the moment. Sick and tired of bullshit, but also literally sick. In this video, though, we're going to talk about how you could have gotten your MOAS return had you just fucking learned something. Now, despite the inflammatory introduction and video title, this does have some genuine intention to it, but it also has a little bit of I told you so mixed into it as well. Because I was always talking about covered calls. Trey at one point tried discussing covered calls. Matt Kors at one point tried discussing covered calls. I think even Bigham's at one point, possibly. A lot of discussion about this. Eventually what happened was that so many people got so butthurt hearing about things that they just didn't understand that they lost money because they wouldn't take time to learn it. And then got angry on the internet because they saw other people making money. Because those people educated themselves. Some of them also even were dishing out educational content free of charge, like myself. And still, we had people angry at us. So let's talk about how you could have literally, I think the rough math came out to about 40 times your initial investment. Actually, when I did the math before I started recording the video, I forgot to add a zero. The number of 40 was actually 400 times. Which would be a rough estimate of 3,900% returns, had you literally just watched things that weren't copium. So let's assume that back in January, and by the way, this is post-split, so the prices will be cut in half of what they were historically. Let's assume that you took, on average, what I am assuming most people would have lying around during this point in time with the COVID checks. The fuck was the word for that? Not stimulation checks. Stimulus checks, not stimulation. Fuck my life. The stimulus checks, okay? I'm assuming that people had about $5,000. No, fuck it. Just to make the math even more egregious here, we'll say 10,000, right? So at this point in time, you had 10,000 shares for a principal of $10,000. And let's say you didn't have 10,000 at the time. Well, if you had 5,000, then whatever the end of this video is, just cut the number in half, and that's what you could have made. At the end of the day, the percentage is about 3,900%, without selling a single share, by the way. 10,000 shares at a cost average of $1 a share. Had you bought 10,000 shares at this point in time, we then have this incident where you could have sold your 10,000 shares at $10 each, which would have been 100 grand, 10x immediately. But this video is about how you could have had MOAS returns without selling a single share. So this, not going to happen. Instead, we could have sold covered calls that expired in 1 month, 5 to 10% out of the money. These were going for about $13 per contract at the time. Now, this had to do with volatility, but also the amount of time, right? Vega and Gamma and Theta were all your friend here. So you could have sold the $13 strike for a 1 month expiration. Had you had 10,000 shares, you could have sold 100 of these, netting you $130,000. You could have turned 10 grand into 130,000 without selling a single share, because these contracts would eventually expire out of the money down here. You would have kept your shares, and you also would have made 13 times your initial investment. Now here's the kicker, is you now have $120,000 liquid that has no bearing to anything. It's yours. You made it for free. You sold a derivative against your raw equity, and it expired worthless. At this point in time, you would still have 10,000 shares and $120,000 liquid. In total, you would now have $150,000 in your name, in your portfolio, without selling a single share. For a lot of people, that's a lot of money. That's probably 3 or 4 teacher salaries in less than 2 months. So now we have $120,000 in capital lying around and 10,000 shares sitting liquid. What you then could have done was taken that $120,000 in money that was given to you for free by some schmuck on Wall Street and bought a lot more shares. So if we have $120,000 and a price of $3, that would be another 40,000 shares. Your boy here fucked up again. I forgot to add these shares to what would be a couple minutes later when we bought more during April. So we're actually missing 40,000 shares in about 2 minutes from where we're at in the video now. So we were eventually selling 800 covered calls. It should have been 1,200, just FYI. With $120,000 that you made for free. So again, just to recap, we have not sold a single share, and we are up 13 times our initial investment, about to be 30 in a moment. So we bought more shares, and then we had another little incidental squeeze that took place. That was another 100% move. So at this point here, after it topped out and fell down, so at this point here, we could have sold 500 covered calls at the $9 strike for a 1-month expiration for about $7 each, which in options value would be $700 a contract. This would yield you $350,000 for free, because these would have also expired out of the money the following month. At this point in time, you would have, to date, without selling a single share, $470,000. And still with 10,000 shares. This is only going into March. This is still before June, by the way. Before the June run. You could have made $500,000 in less than 4 months. Now, here's where the strategy becomes a little complex, perhaps. This entire range here, before the June run, was known as Theta Gang Zone. This is where you would have been selling spreads. You would be selling the $9 strike for calls and the $5 strike for puts, right? I'm not going to do the math here because the whole entire idea is that you bought and you held, and all you had to do was once a month sell covered calls. This could also be another $100,000 to $200,000, give or take. So now you're wondering, well, I have $350,000 lying around and I only want to buy and hold. What else can I do? Well, given the low here at about April, you could have bought 70,000 shares at $5 each. This would be another 700 covered calls. Wait until we get to June. So now at this point, there's a lot more talk about AMC. Within the next couple months, I would be saying and predicting the squeeze that was coming. Trey was getting a lot of popularity. Matt Kors was also getting a lot of popularity alongside AMC and the storm that it was going by. Well, what happens next? Well, you see, you would have known that there was a squeeze coming because of my research, but also the fact that Trey was documenting the insane short interest, that utilization was at 100%. The money printer was still going burr this whole time. The SPY was going up 2 to 3% every day. A lot of really cool stuff was going on. So you could have sold at the top, relatively speaking. You could have sold here your 80,000 shares at $9 each, and that would have been 720 grand, I think. That would have been $750,000. But we aren't selling any shares. We're not selling any shares. So then what you could have done is we had the squeeze, and you could have sold 80,000 shares. At the top here was $44. So you could have sold 80,000 shares for $3.5 million. But again, we're not selling any shares, and that's cool. So then what you could have done, and listen, even I am seething at myself for not committing to this. I was too busy buying calls, not selling them. Instead, you could have written 800 covered calls because we own 80,000 shares at this point at a premium of, fuck me, I can't even remember how fucking, I saw these things going for $25 each. Back in mid-June. You could have sold $25 calls at the $50 strike for a July expiration. You could have made $2 million selling out-of-the-money calls that would end up expiring worthless. At this point in time, you would now have 80,000 shares and $2.5 million to your name. Over the span of 7 months, you would have turned 10 grand into $2.5 million without selling a single share. And now we could just rinse and repeat going into the rest of here and just sell covered call after covered call. And God only knows what the math roughly ends up being here. But by the end of it, I would say you could have made $5.5 million without selling a single share. So just for shits and giggles, let's keep doing the math. Right here, you could have also sold another 800 additional covered calls because the previous ones you had sold at the top of the squeeze in June expired worthless. Probably at least $5 per contract, which is 500 in premium, which would be, what, 400K? Yeah. You would have made another $400,000 here. At this point in time, you would still have 80,000 shares and $2.8 million to your name. And then you could have also done it again back here. Sell another 800 covered calls. IV was dying at this point, so we could call it $4 each, which would then net you $320,000. You would still have 80,000 shares and $3.2 million to your name. You have now, within 8 months, turned $10,000 into $3.3 million. You could have then done it again here. IV was juiced again, and we'll say this is probably like $8 each. Which would have netted you an additional $640,000. At this point in time, a month later, you still have 80,000 shares and almost $4 million to your name. So all in all, and this doesn't even go into the fact that you had the additional squeezes going on in March and July of this year, and the fact that you could have had more aggressive ways of selling covered calls throughout all of this. You could have turned $10,000 into $4 million in less than a year without selling a single share. And some of you idiots have the audacity to come after people like me and Charlie and Trey and Matt and a lot of other good people, Froggy, Booksy, tons of awesome people who have only been creating free content that you can watch and learn from, that have been telling you about this for going on years now, right? And there are videos before that, like Kamikaze Trades. He's the guy that I learned this about from a year and a half ago, free of charge. I watched 1 to 2 ads that were 15 seconds each. It cost me 30 seconds of my time to have a strategy that could have yielded me $4 million with 10 grand. And again, you guys as well. And you're still angry.